The Empire Builder. Dominic Thorne's corner office overlooked the sprawling metropolis like a castle tower surveying its kingdom. Behind his imported mahogany desk, he reviewed quarterly reports with the same analytical precision that had built Thorne Enterprises into a commercial giant. The numbers pleased him. Another record quarter, another victory to add to his unbroken streak of successes. At 42, Dominic had everything wealth could purchase. The penthouse overlooking Central Park, the vacation homes across 3 continents, the private jet waiting at his beck and call. What he didn't have, friends, relationships, connections, he convinced himself were unnecessary distractions. "Mr. Thorne?" The intercom buzzed softly. "Your 10 o'clock appointment is here." "Send them in," he responded, not looking up from his tablet. The door opened to reveal Sophia Bennett, his newly appointed executive assistant. At 34, she carried herself with quiet confidence that belied her modest background. Unlike her predecessor, who had quit after 6 months of Dominic's exacting standards, Sophia hadn't cowered during their initial interview. Instead, she had met his cutting questions with thoughtful answers, and even dared to challenge one of his assumptions about market strategy. "The Richardson contract is prepared for your signature," Sophia said, placing a leather portfolio on his desk. "And I've rescheduled tomorrow's board meeting to accommodate your mother's doctor appointment." Dominic's head snapped up. "I didn't authorize that change." "No, sir, you didn't." Sophia's hazel eyes remained steady. "But when I called to confirm your attendance, your mother mentioned you'd promised to accompany her to her cardiac specialist. Given the importance of both commitments, I took the liberty of creating a solution." For a moment, silence filled the office. His previous assistants had learned quickly never to make decisions without his explicit approval. Yet here stood Sophia, 3 weeks into the job, already breaking his cardinal rule. "The board members were surprisingly accommodating," she added. "Mr. Watkins actually commended the consideration for family priorities." Dominic's jaw tightened. His mother's health had become increasingly fragile over the past year, a fact he kept strictly private. Only a handful of people knew about Eleanor Thorne's heart condition, and he preferred to keep it that way. Weakness of any kind, even concern for a parent, was vulnerability he couldn't afford in the cutthroat business world. "Next time, consult me first," he said curtly, signing the contract with an aggressive flourish. Sophia nodded, but something in her expression suggested she wasn't intimidated. "Of course. By the way, your mother called earlier. She's coming by for lunch today? I've arranged for catering from Bellucci's, her favorite according to her assistant." This time, Dominic couldn't hide his surprise. His mother rarely visited his office, preferring he come to her historic brownstone in the Upper East Side. And how did Sophia know about Bellucci's? "You've been busy," he observed. "I believe in thoroughness, Mr. Thorne," she replied with a small smile. "Anticipating needs is part of my job description." As she turned to leave, Dominic found himself watching her, not with his usual critical assessment, but with something approaching curiosity. In a world where people either feared or fawned over him, Sophia Bennett did neither. She simply did her job with exceptional competence and an empathy he found both foreign and slightly unsettling. Little did he know, within hours, that empathy would become the one thing his billions couldn't buy, yet the thing he needed most. The fallen matriarch Eleanor Thorne arrived at Thorne Tower precisely at noon, the picture of dignified elegance in her tailored navy suit and pearl necklace, a gift from her late husband. At 71, she still commanded attention, her silver hair swept into a sophisticated chignon, her posture impeccable despite the subtle walking cane she'd reluctantly adopted last spring. Dominic greeted her with the formal kiss on the cheek that had become their standard greeting since his father's passing 15 years ago. Their relationship, while dutiful, had calcified into something resembling business associates more than mother and son. "The quarterly reports exceeded projections," he said as they settled into the private dining area adjacent to his office, where Sophia had arranged a beautiful lunch spread. "The Eastern Asia expansion is moving ahead of schedule." Eleanor nodded politely, though her eyes reflected little interest in corporate triumphs. "I didn't come to discuss business, Dominic. I came because it's been nearly a month since I've seen my son." Discomfort flickered across his face. I've been preoccupied with the Singapore merger." "You've been preoccupied for a decade," she replied softly, no accusation in her tone, only a gentle observation. Sophia entered with a bottle of sparkling water, pouring for both before discreetly stepping back. Eleanor's face brightened. "You must be Sophia. Jeanette mentioned you called about the lunch arrangements. How thoughtful to remember Bellucci's." "It was no trouble, Mrs. Thorne. I hope everything is to your liking." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Perfect. Please join us for a moment." Dominic frowned. "Ms. Bennett has other duties to attend to, which can surely wait 5 minutes while she enjoys the meal she arranged." Eleanor interjected with the quiet authority that had once governed Manhattan's most exclusive charity boards. Before Dominic could object further, Eleanor's hand flew to her chest. Her water glass toppled, sending crystal shards across the mahogany table. Her complexion drained to alarming pallor. "Mother?" Dominic stood abruptly, panic edging his voice. Eleanor gasped for breath, her elegant frame crumpling. "My pills," she managed, gesturing weakly toward her handbag before collapsing against the table. Dominic froze, his brilliant mind suddenly blank with terror. This man who orchestrated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat stood paralyzed, watching his invincible mother transform into a fragile being before his eyes. Sophia moved instantly. She eased Eleanor to the floor, placing a cushion beneath her head while retrieving the handbag. "Call 911, she instructed Dominic firmly. Finding a small pill case, she placed a tablet under Eleanor's tongue with gentle efficiency. "Mrs. Thorne, you're going to be all right. The medication will help while we wait for the ambulance. Just focus on breathing with me," Sophia said, her voice calm and steady as she took Eleanor's hand, demonstrating slow, deliberate breaths. Eleanor's frightened eyes locked onto Sophia's compassionate gaze, finding an anchor in the storm of her distress. Gradually, her breathing steadied. When the paramedics arrived, Sophia recounted Eleanor's symptoms with professional precision and identified the nitroglycerin tablet she'd administered, information Dominic himself couldn't have provided in his state of shock. "I'll accompany Mrs. Thorne to the hospital," Sophia told him as they loaded Eleanor into the ambulance. "Take whatever time you need to finish your critical calls, then meet us there. I'll update you continuously." Dominic nodded mutely, watching his assistant climb into the ambulance beside his mother, their hands still clasped together. In that moment, the mighty CEO understood what true helplessness felt like. His wealth, power, and influence, the currencies he valued above all else, were suddenly worthless. 3 hours later, he arrived at the cardiac unit to find Sophia sitting beside his mother's bed, reading aloud from what appeared to be a collection of poetry. Eleanor's eyes were closed, but her face looked peaceful, monitors beeping steadily around her. "Tennyson," Sophia whispered when she noticed him. "Your mother mentioned he was her favorite when we spoke last week." Dominic stood motionless in the doorway, witnessing this unexpected tenderness. He couldn't remember the last time he'd asked his mother about her preferences, her joys, her favorite poets. Yet his assistant, a woman who'd known Eleanor for less than an hour, had somehow created this moment of tranquility amid medical chaos. For the first time in years, Dominic Thorne felt something crack in the carefully constructed armor around his heart. Whispers and remedies. The doctors diagnosed Eleanor with unstable angina, prescribing medication and strict rest. What they couldn't prescribe was the care that truly began her healing, the kind that came from Sophia's steady presence in the following days. Dominic had arranged for the finest private room, specialists on call, and a rotation of private nurses. Yet it was Sophia who noticed how the fluorescent lights aggravated Eleanor's migraines, replacing them with soft lamps brought from Eleanor's home. It was Sophia who discovered Eleanor couldn't sleep in the stiff hospital gowns, bringing her favorite silk nightdresses instead. Small comforts that made immeasurable differences. "You don't need to do this," Dominic told Sophia on the third evening, finding her adjusting Eleanor's pillows while his mother slept. "I've hired a team of professionals. With all due respect, Mr. Thorne, professionals can provide medical care, but they don't know your mother's preference for chamomile tea at exactly 8 p.m. Or how she likes the blinds partially open to see the stars, Sophia replied quietly. Sometimes healing requires more than medicine. Dominic frowned. You've known my mother for days. How could you possibly know these things? I listen, she said simply. And your mother is quite wonderful when she shares her stories. In the dimmed hospital room, something shifted in Dominic's perception. This woman had stepped far beyond professional obligation into a realm of compassion he barely recognized. More disconcerting was the realization that his mother had shared more with Sophia in days than she had with him in years. The board meeting is rescheduled for Thursday, he said, retreating to familiar territory. I'll need the quarterly presentations prepared. Sophia nodded. They're already complete. I've emailed you the drafts. His phone buzzed with an incoming message. Investors demanding attention, deals requiring decisions. The world that had always defined him continued spinning, indifferent to his mother's condition. Dominic glanced at Eleanor's sleeping form, then back at his phone, torn between worlds. Go, Sophia said gently. She's stable and you have responsibilities. I'll stay a while longer. Relief and something like shame flooded him simultaneously. He nodded curtly and left, but not before catching a glimpse of Sophia returning to a well-worn notebook beside Eleanor's bed. Later that night, unable to sleep despite resolving the investor crisis, Dominic returned to the hospital. He paused outside his mother's room, hearing soft voices within. The door was slightly ajar, revealing Sophia still there, Eleanor now awake. He wasn't always like this, Eleanor was saying, her voice fragile but warm. After James, his father, died, something changed in Dominic. It was as if he decided feelings were liabilities. Grief affects everyone differently, Sophia replied. James was the emotional one in our family. He taught Dominic to sail, to laugh, to appreciate beauty beyond balance sheets. When cancer took him, it took those lessons too. Eleanor sighed. Now my son builds empires but has forgotten how to build connections. Dominic stood frozen, an uninvited eavesdropper to truths he'd long buried. There's a photo album in my library, Eleanor continued. Third shelf, blue binding. Would you bring it tomorrow? I'd like to remember happier times. Of course, Sophia promised. Dominic slipped away unnoticed, unsettled by revelations about himself spoken in his absence. That night, he found himself standing in his mother's empty brownstone, located not the third but the fourth shelf, pulling down not a blue album but a leather-bound journal in his father's handwriting, unopened since the funeral. The night watch, 1 week after Eleanor's collapse, Dominic arrived at the hospital well past midnight. Meetings had stretched endlessly, but for once, they hadn't commanded his full attention. Images of his mother's fragile form and Sophia's steady presence had intruded repeatedly into his thoughts. He expected to find the night nurse on duty. Instead, he discovered Sophia asleep in the visitor's chair, her hand resting protectively over Eleanor's. The blue photo album lay open across her lap, pages displaying images of a younger, smiling Dominic sailing with his father. Dominic stood silently, studying the tableau before him. Sophia's dedication went beyond professional courtesy or even exceptional employee performance. This was something he hadn't encountered in his ruthless corporate world. Pure, unselfish care, expecting nothing in return. Moving quietly, he lifted the album from her lap. His breath caught at a photograph he'd forgotten existed. 16-year-old Dominic accepting a sailing trophy, his father's arm thrown proudly around his shoulders, both laughing into the camera with identical expressions of joy. Below it, in his mother's elegant handwriting, the summer Dominic learned that winning isn't everything. A lesson long forgotten. Eleanor stirred, her eyes opening to find her son standing there. Dominic, she whispered, careful not to wake Sophia. You're here. I should have been here sooner, he admitted, surprised by his own words. Eleanor's gaze softened. She hasn't left except to bring me things from home. Declined the private nurses you hired. Said they didn't know how to make my tea properly. A small smile touched her lips. Reminds me of your father, that stubborn kindness. Dominic glanced at Sophia, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the slight furrow in her brow even in sleep. She has her own life, her own responsibilities. This isn't her burden. That's what makes it remarkable, isn't it? Eleanor reached for his hand, a gesture so unfamiliar that Dominic almost pulled away. She doesn't see me as a burden, just as a person worth caring for. The simplicity of the statement struck him with unexpected force. When had he stopped seeing people as worthy of care rather than as assets or obstacles? When had success become his only measure of value? The doctors say I can go home tomorrow, Eleanor continued. They're quite pleased with my recovery. I'll arrange for home care, the best available, Dominic said automatically. Eleanor squeezed his hand. I'd rather have Sophia coordinate my care if she's willing. She understands what I need better than any agency could. For once, Dominic didn't argue. Instead, he carefully draped his suit jacket over Sophia's sleeping form before pulling a second chair beside his mother's bed. Tell me about the sailing trophy, he said quietly, pointing to the photograph. I don't remember it clearly. Eleanor's surprise melted into a warm smile as she began recounting the story of a summer long past when winning had been secondary to the joy of the journey. As she spoke, Dominic felt something long dormant stirring within him, the recognition that the empire he'd built stood empty without people to share it with. Blooming in winter snow fell gently outside Eleanor's brownstone, coating the city in pristine white 2 months after her hospital stay. In the library, a fire crackled as Eleanor sat bundled in her favorite cashmere throw. Color returned to her cheeks, strength gradually rebuilding in her once frail frame. Dominic entered carrying a tray of tea, prepared precisely the way his mother preferred, a skill he'd insisted on learning himself rather than leaving to the household staff. You're getting better at this, Eleanor observed with pleased surprise as he arranged the cups. Only took you 6 weeks to master what Sophia learned in 1 day. Some of us are slower students, he admitted with the hint of a smile that had begun appearing more frequently on his once stern face. The doorbell chimed, and moments later Sophia appeared, snowflakes melting in her hair, carrying a wrapped package. Eleanor brightened immediately. Right on time! Dominic just made tea. A dangerous proposition, Sophia teased, accepting the offered cup. Though I hear he's improving. The easy warmth between them no longer surprised Dominic. What continued to astonish him was how naturally he'd been drawn into their circle of affection, how willingly he'd allowed himself to be. Following Eleanor's discharge, Dominic had shocked his executive team by reducing his 60-hour work weeks to a more reasonable schedule, prioritizing evening visits with his mother. Initially, he'd told himself it was temporary, just until Eleanor recovered fully, but something fundamental had shifted inside him. The quarterly reports came in today, he said, placing the package he'd brought on the side table. Thorne Enterprises showed our first slight decline in 8 quarters. Eleanor looked concerned. Is everything all right? Actually, yes. Dominic surprised himself with his genuine lack of distress. We declined the Westridge development because their environmental impact report was concerning. And we invested in the community healthcare initiative instead of the luxury resort chain. Decisions that might reduce short-term profits but build long-term value, Sophia observed. Precisely. Dominic met her gaze with newfound clarity. Some returns can't be measured in quarterly statements. Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You sound like your father? Dominic unwrapped his package, revealing a restored chess set, his father's favorite, long stored away after his death. I thought we might play, he suggested quietly. It's been too long. As Eleanor arranged the pieces with delighted fingers, Sophia rose to leave. I should give you both privacy for family time. Stay, Dominic said, the single word carrying weight beyond its simplicity. Please. The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken meaning. In the weeks of Eleanor's recovery, something profound had developed between Dominic and Sophia, something neither had put into words, but both increasingly acknowledged through lingering glances and conversations that stretched long into evening hours. Eleanor watched them with knowing eyes. Sophia, dear, would you mind checking on the soup I left simmering? I'm afraid I can't trust Dominic with anything beyond tea quite yet. When Sophia disappeared toward the kitchen, Eleanor turned to her son. I've watched you these past months, finding your way back to the person you were meant to be. I'm not sure I know who that is yet, Dominic admitted. But you're looking now, Eleanor said, placing her hand over his. That's the important part. And Sophia, she sees in you what I've always seen, beneath all those defenses you built. Dominic glanced toward the kitchen. She deserves more than I know how to give. Then learn, Eleanor said simply. Just as you learned to make my tea. Some lessons take time, but they're worth the effort. When Sophia returned, Dominic stood, offering his chair at the chess table. My father always said chess reveals character, he told her. I'd like to see yours if you'll play against my mother. She's formidable. I accept, Sophia replied with a smile that warmed the winter day. Though I should warn you both, my grandfather was a regional champion. As the chess match unfolded, Dominic observed from the window seat, watching snowflakes transform the garden into a wonderland of possibility. For the first time in 15 years, the empire builder found himself dreaming not of acquisitions and mergers, but of connections and second chances. Eleanor captured Sophia's night with a triumphant smile. Check, she announced. Sophia studied the board thoughtfully before making her move. Life, like chess, is full of unexpected strategies, she said, repositioning her queen to protect her king. Sometimes what looks like a loss becomes the beginning of something beautiful. Her eyes met Dominic's across the room. And in that moment, the man who once valued nothing beyond success understood at last what his mother had known all along. That love, in its infinite forms, was the only true measure of wealth. Outside, winter continued its gentle transformation of the world, much as Sophia's compassionate hands had transformed the frozen landscape of Dominic Thorne's heart.